Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading, then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Alyssa Bream, and we're looking at a passage from Acts chapter 5. This is an account of Ananias and Sapphira, and it's caused a lot of debate over the years. Some have questioned its authenticity. They suggest that the story may simply be this way to explain the sudden deaths of members in a new church community. But this suspicion of this text is really just a way of questioning the possibility of miracles. Other people have suggested this account is similar to other judgment stories found in the Old Testament, like the judgment of Achan by Joshua. But most people who struggle with this passage do so because death seems like this harsh punishment for lying. And although the event is controversial, there's a purpose that seems to be accomplished by this judgment from God. Verse 13 contains this observation. It says, "No one else dared join them." So it indicates that the fear of the Lord struck the hearts of the people outside the church, so that only those who were true believers became a part of the community. This distinction gave some credibility when the church members shared the gospel, and many people are converted as a result of this. So it's like an elimination of hypocrites. Everybody's true believers. Their message begins to spread. And it also protected this fledgling community from the infiltration of hypocrites or others who wanted to get in the church and subvert it, see it broken apart. But this is also yet another piece of evidence that shows that the ministry of Jesus continues in the church. Like Jesus has a responsibility to care and protect his church, and the supernatural judgment on Ananias and Sapphira is further evidence that Jesus is the Lord of the church, and he has the right to discipline and to judge those who are associated with it. You said before we came on air that we've had conversations about this passage before in previous years. Judgment by death seems very, extreme, right?
Mm-hmm.
It should scare all of us, right? We should call. Why is it that this action of God is so controversial? Why is death in general, like for judgment, so controversial?
In the Old Testament, there's the concept of an eye for an eye, that the judgment shouldn't be crazy, cruel and unusual punishment. Like if somebody steals a soda from the Dollar General and then they're locked up for life. Like that just doesn't make sense. And I think that's what we're seeing here, is that it doesn't seem like the punishment maybe fits the crime, that it's just crazy, like you said. And so I think the important thing here, one of the important things here, is that this is not a paradigm for how lying gets dealt with throughout the rest of Scripture. This is not something that it's a one-off story. It is a very unusual story, and that's why one of the reasons why they question its authenticity, and one of kind of the reasonings behind to explain the death, is because they truly thought that the resurrection of Jesus, that the second coming was going to be very quick, and that they didn't think that they were going to die until that happened. And so people died. And so that's one of the reasonings that I don't necessarily think that it's just we're trying to write off miracles, because I don't know, it is one of those stories that just sits there. And as I was searching it, I'll search for like scholarly papers on this as I'm researching, and I was searching it, and it's like Ananias and Sapphira worksheet. Like, this is a story that we tell kids to teach them to tell the truth, but I think it goes much deeper than lying, and I think that's why maybe it isn't as controversial maybe as we think. It's about not the lie, it's about the reason for the lie. It's about trying to grab power in this church. It's about trying to make yourself seem so much better, so much more caring, so much more part of the church. And we really don't know if that's why, but it seems like he was trying to grab power in a very early church and trying to
He was
inroads.
trying to gain influence, right? It comes on the heels of, Acts chapter 4 ends telling about Barnabas doing a very similar thing. He
Right.
sells property, he brings it, he gives it. And Barnabas is well thought of we find it later in Acts how well thought of he is, but even while Jesus is alive, we begin to see some, favor from Jesus toward Barnabas. But especially now, he's gaining favor. And often one other thing, and I still see this in the church today, we see someone who gains influence or favor, or a situation plays out in their life in a particular way, and we want to mimic it or emulate it. And we think, okay, I'm going to do this. And it doesn't always work out that way, right? Because motives do matter. That's the first thing. Motives matter. But even in the Old Testament, like there were some pretty strict regulations, as we're recording this sometime this week. So it would have been Monday or Tuesday in our reading that particular week in Leviticus. It lists all of these sexually immoral infractions, of which most ended with death, right? They was like, okay, if you do this, you're going to die. But they're told it's rare, right, that we find that they're killed before they're told the punishment, right? Most of the time they lay this regulation down, and then if they commit it after they know, right, then you die. There are a few times in the Old Testament where that's not true. So like, and I think I'm going to get these names right. Nadab and Abihu, which would have been Aaron's sons, right? So they offer strange fire, and God kills them, right? And then he says, after the fact, don't drink before you go into, which implies that they were drunk when they went in. But there was nothing said about not drinking before you do it. But after God kills them, and then after the fact, he says, don't drink, and here's why. And in this case, we don't find, right, no commandment that says don't lie to the Holy Spirit about giving, or don't, there are some, do not lies. There's plenty of that. But we just don't find it. And I think it does become clear that this is an example. You said you used the word paradigm. It's not a model to follow. Like we shouldn't expect. There are consequences for lying, whether we like that or not. There are consequences for lying. Sometimes they're small, sometimes they're great, and but there are consequences for lying. But this seems to try to set a tone for a whole group of people, not just about lying, but about, as you mentioned, their motives for leadership. Why are you wanting to be at the top? Because we've all seen abuses of power, especially when it comes around money in the church.
It's about taking the church seriously, that, they thought they could just do this play and just hand over some money. And I think that is maybe some of this fear. It wasn't necessarily even just a fear of God, but hopefully it was like a reverence, I think, too, because I think sometimes I feel like Americans don't have enough words for fear, or we just use fear for like a good fear and like a reverence fear. And so sometimes as we're reading translations, we're not really sure if this was like
Afraid fear,
or like oh man, I better not tell a lie, like, and so like in like a fearful, like, does God still love me kind of a way. So I think we don't necessarily, we can infer and we can guess and we can talk, but I don't think that we really know which kind of way that went.
You mean with the church?
With the people around it, how people would have taken it.
I think we would all, if we were all honest, right? there would be some moments where we would appreciate. I'm trying to make sure I'm choosing every word correctly because it can and will be used against me. Where we would see the value in a weeding out of hypocrisy among believers. I think all of us have those moments. And as I read it again this time and prepared, one of the things that I wanted to evaluate about myself is to make sure my motives are right. They're pure. It's not, I am a firm believer that had their motives been right, but their actions wrong, right? The result is different.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
It seems that they took the right action, right? They gave money to the church. Who's going to argue with that? But the underlying motive for it, and that's a really, really dangerous place to be. So let's talk about why this doesn't contradict the idea. This active judgment, that plays out. Why does this not contradict God? That God is a God of love, a God of mercy, and a God of compassion.
We see so many stories like this. You mentioned a lot in the Old Testament where like the judgment comes down either swiftly from God or from humans that, because of the law. And I don't think we walk away from the Old Testament feeling that way. We have to believe in the righteousness of God and the love at the same time. I don't think that the righteousness and taking care of his church, like you had said, Jesus was still here taking care of his church, and this was protecting the church from who knows what would have happened if these people with questionable motives at the best got into power and started just creating havoc in the church in this early time when it needed to just be a very pure thing. Because if it starts out bad, if you're making sourdough starter and it starts wrong, it's not going to mature into the right way. And so I think in some ways it was an act of compassion for everyone else around that to protect and to make sure that the church started in a holy and a proper and a loving way, that if they had been allowed to stay, that it wouldn't have happened.
I think we try to make it either or, even let's take the judgment of God out of it, the correction issue. You get to 1 Corinthians, there's an issue that the church still has to deal with. And you still have to do it out of love, right? That tension is a real tension. The holiness of God, the righteousness of God, the truth of God, and God's love over here. And we can't fully understand it, right? The closest we can come is as parents, right? There are moments where we have to enforce discipline on our kids that is painful. It's not that we don't love them, right? That we may love them more in that moment than ever, but we're trying to offer this corrective action that benefits them not just in this moment, but in the days and years to come, And fortunately, right, this is a singular story, Now, the judgment of God is still coming in the end, but this is a singular story in the New Testament that plays out this way, right? And because I think more than one we'd be praying for everybody to die, right? We would think that should be our response. And I think you're right. There are moments where it's done because in that moment, that is the thing that needs to happen, right? That otherwise things go haywire, and there's lots of other problems. And I think we just struggle to understand God's judgment and his love are not mutually exclusive.
It's one of those that I I think people naturally tend to go to one side or the other. They really like one side or the other. They like the judgment of God because they feel very righteous thinking about that, or they like,
it may not even be like it's just more comfortable, right? Yeah, it might be a place of comfort. And do you think some of that's personality driven? Is it upbringing? Is it inputs into your life?
I think all of that plays in. Yeah, I don't think you can separate nature from nurture a lot of times. And I think that our personalities are so formed by early times in our life that I don't know. That I don't. There probably are definitely some personalities that are a little on the harsher side, maybe, if you were, and that just like that, like everything, or maybe
I lean more that way, right? I lean at I've it's been tough for me to figure out whether it is my holiness upbringing. I think that some of that has to do with it. My parental upbringing, my all of those things play in it. So I find myself more comfortable. It would be the way I would say it. On the let's deal with this, kind of side. But there are moments, and most of this comes from life experience, right? There are things that I have been through that allow me to show extreme compassion in some situations. Yep. And without those moments, right? And I know the tension, right? I even there are times I walk into a situation that I'm feeling the weight of it, like, you're stupid, but I love you, right? Kind of situation. And so I think we do naturally, whether it's nature or nurture, fall to one side or the other. But I don't think we can be shaped into Jesus' image if we only stay on that side, right? If whether we have life experiences that causes us to change, or we just seek, because I don't think, like, I've been through a divorce, right? And it's changed the way I view certain situations and how I can help people. But you don't have to go through a divorce or some major traumatic event to shift from one side to the other. But you do have to be willing to let the Holy Spirit shape you, right? So that you can see, okay, it's not all one way or the other, right? It's not all bricks or velvet. It's a little bit of both.
Throughout my life, I've seen a shift from like very rigid rule follower because I didn't want to get in trouble, which I don't think is kind of the same way that you view life. I don't think you're scared to get in trouble.
Yeah, I'm not a real rule follower.
And so that judgment side of God almost seemed more comfortable because I'm like, if I do everything right, then he'll love me. And I think I've had to come to the place where I view the love of God in a different way. And hopefully, if you start with the love of God, hopefully it will change you and you will want to follow the rules. And if you start with the rules, getting back to that love, I think, is harder. That's my take on it, from somebody who was raised with very strict rules and like followed them. And
well, I think my observation when I see people like this is when they move, they overcorrect instead of trying to find temperance and understand both, right? I think it's tough to make a move either direction, frankly, depending on how you're raised. So good. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us Monday as we continue a conversation around our daily Bible reading.